You know how they say life-changing moments can happen in the blink of an eye? For me, it was a roar of the crowd at a football stadium. It was 4 years ago. I was at our local team's match, fully decked out in team colors, scarf in one hand, soda in the other. The energy was insane. People yelling, chanting, and just being completely consumed by the beautiful chaos that is live football. And that's when I saw her. She was a couple of rows down, laughing at something her friend said, her eyes bright, cheeks flushed with excitement. She was waving a flag like her life depended on it. The team scored, the crowd erupted, and before I knew it, I was cheering with her, just a random moment between strangers. But when she looked up at me and smiled, it felt like the entire stadium froze for a second. Later that evening, as the game wound down, I somehow gathered the courage to approach her. I fumbled my way through asking if she wanted to grab a coffee sometime, and to my surprise, she said yes. That's how it all started, two fans bonded by their love of the game and a passion for our team. For the next 2 months, we saw each other regularly, slowly building a connection that felt perfect. She was cheerful and kind, the type of person who could light up a room with her laugh. She also had this quirk of being super thoughtful, like remembering I loved chocolate milk and randomly showing up with a carton after a game. Everything about her felt right, and before I knew it, we were officially dating. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I was too smitten to see the red flags that would later knock me flat. But hey, hindsight's 20/20ths, right? Dating her felt like living in a highlight reel. From day one, we clicked. It wasn't just that we were both die-hard fans of the same team, it was the way she made everything feel exciting. Going to games together became our thing. Rain or shine, home or away, we'd be there, chanting ourselves hoarse and celebrating every win like we were the ones scoring the goals. When the team played away games, we'd host these mini-watch parties in my tiny apartment. She'd bring snacks, I'd set up the TV, and we'd both yell at the screen like the players could actually hear us. It wasn't just about football, though. It was the way she made everything in life feel brighter, like I'd somehow landed the most cheerful, fun, and vibrant person in the city. But it wasn't all perfect. There were moments, little cracks in the foundation that I ignored because I was so wrapped up in her. Her mood swings were intense. She could go from laughing about some silly meme to snapping at me for not understanding her vibes, in the blink of an eye. She'd always find an excuse, work stress, her family, hormones, or even the weather. And every time, I let it slide because when she was in her good moods, it was like being in the presence of sunshine itself. The other thing was her sudden disappearances. At first, it was occasional, an urgent family matter here, a sick relative there. She'd apologize profusely, swearing it was unavoidable, and I'd believe her. Why wouldn't I? She had this knack for sounding so sincere, for making me feel like she hated being away as much as I hated seeing her go. But over time, the excuses got weird. One time, she said her cousin's dog had swallowed something dangerous, and she had to be there. Another time, she claimed her aunt's house needed repairs, and no one else could help. I chalked it up to her being overly family-oriented. That's a good thing, right? Still, it left me lonely during those stretches, especially since the only time we seemed completely in sync was when football was involved. Those breaks in the season? Brutal. She'd disappear, and I'd find myself sitting in an empty apartment, wondering what she was doing and counting down the days until the next match so we could get back to normal. My friends thought it was weird, too. Man, why does she always leave when the team's on a break? It's like she's following their schedule, one of them joked. I laughed it off because, honestly, I didn't want to admit I'd been thinking the same thing. For 3 years, this was our rhythm, football, laughter, and then those strange absences. I figured no relationship is perfect, and this was just one of those quirks you put up with when you love someone. But deep down, a little voice kept nagging me, asking if there was more to her excuses than she let on. Our life together felt like a love letter to football. Every match day was an event, and she turned each one into a celebration. She had this ritual of waking up early to make breakfast, eggs shaped like footballs and pancakes with syrup goal lines, her idea of a joke. Then, she'd spend an hour picking out the perfect team jersey to wear. We even had matching scarves, custom-made with our names on them. She loved those scarves and always insisted we take a picture together at every game, her holding my arm, her face lit up like she'd just scored the winning goal. Away games were where she truly shined. We'd hit the road with our car decked out in team colors, a miniature team flag fluttering on the antenna. The drive would be filled with her endless chatter, everything from predictions about the match to funny stories about her coworkers. I loved those drives. She had this way of making even a 2-hour traffic jam feel like an adventure. At the stadium, she was electric. She knew all the chants by heart, had a favorite spot in the stands, and somehow managed to befriend everyone around us. It felt like I was dating the queen of the fanbase. People would come up to us just to say hi to her, and she'd greet them like old friends. But outside the stadium, things weren't always as bright. Those mood swings I mentioned. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. They started creeping into our match days. She'd be laughing one minute and then oddly quiet the next, staring into the distance like something heavy was on her mind. "Everything okay?" I'd ask, genuinely concerned. "Yeah, just tired," she'd say, brushing it off with a quick smile. But the smile never quite reached her eyes. And then there were the vacations. At first, they seemed perfectly timed, always during the team's off-season. She'd get a call or a text, and suddenly, she'd be packing her bags to leave town. One time, she claimed her uncle was having surgery and needed her help, but when I asked about it later, she got defensive. "Why do you care so much?" "It's just family stuff," she snapped. I told myself it wasn't worth fighting over. She'd come back from these trips cheerful as ever, showering me with affection, and I'd forget all about the doubts gnawing at the back of my mind. Still, some things didn't add up. Like the time she flew across the country in the dead of winter, claiming her cousin had broken his leg and couldn't manage on his own. "Doesn't he have siblings?" I asked, trying to make sense of it. "Yeah, but they're useless," she said with a shrug. "Besides, I'm the responsible one in the family." It was little things like that, answers that didn't quite line up but weren't blatantly suspicious enough to call her out on. I told myself I was just overthinking it. Football was my anchor during these times. The second the season started again, she'd be back to her old self, and it felt like nothing had ever been wrong. We'd laugh, cheer, and hold each other close in the stands as if those absences hadn't left a gaping hole in our lives. For 3 years, this cycle repeated. Game day highs and off-season absences. I convinced myself that her quirks were just part of who she was. After all, no one's perfect, right? But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. If there was one player on the team my girlfriend admired above all else, it was the captain. And honestly, who could blame her? The guy was a legend. He wasn't just a great player, he was the player. The kind of guy who could turn a losing game around with a single goal, the one who always had the crowd on their feet. She talked about him constantly, but always in the way you talk about a hero or an icon. "Did you see the way he handled that corner kick?" she'd gush after games. Or, "Can you believe how humble he is during interviews? He's the heart of the team." It never seemed weird. I mean, I admired the guy too. He'd been with the team for years and led them to some of their biggest victories. Everyone loved him. Heck, we even had a poster of him in our living room, her idea, of course. Game days were when her admiration for him really shone. She knew every stat, every career highlight. She even had a favorite chant that was all about him, and she'd belt it out louder than anyone else in the stadium. "You know, I teased her once, you talk about him more than you talk about me." She laughed, playfully smacking my arm. "Jealous, are we? Don't worry, babe. You're still my MVP." That was just her personality, full of life, a little over the top, and always passionate about the things she cared about. I loved that about her. She even went out of her way to meet him once during a fan event. She was giddy the entire week leading up to it, talking about what she'd say and what she'd wear. When the day came, she dragged me along, practically bouncing with excitement as we waited in line. When it was finally her turn to meet him, she was like a kid on Christmas morning. She handed him a jersey to sign, rattled off some compliment about his last match, and asked for a photo. The captain, ever the gracious pro, smiled warmly and posed with her. "Look," she said afterward, showing me the photo like it was a prized treasure. "Can you believe I actually got to meet him?" I smiled, happy to see her so thrilled. "It's just a guy, you know," I joked. She shot me a mock glare. "Just a guy? He's the captain. Show some respect." We laughed about it, and for a while, I thought nothing of it. She'd always been a superfan, and I chalked it up to that. But looking back now, those moments feel heavier. There was a spark in her eyes whenever she talked about him, something more intense than just admiration for a player. At the time, I mistook it for passion, her endless enthusiasm for the team. If there was one thing I dreaded as much as the team's off-season, it was her sudden disappearances during those breaks. You'd think with no games to watch, we'd have more time together, but somehow, the opposite always happened. It started off subtle. A family emergency here, a sick relative there. At first, it made sense. She was a family-oriented person, always ready to drop everything to help someone in need. It was one of the things I admired about her. But as the seasons passed, her reasons for leaving became odd. Like the time she said her aunt's neighbor's dog had run away, and she had to go help because no one else cared enough. Or the winter she flew across the country because her cousin had broken his leg and couldn't manage on his own. "Doesn't he have parents?" I asked, half joking. "They're too busy with work," she said, brushing it off. "Besides, I'm the only one he really trusts." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the timing of these trips was always too perfect. Every time the team went on vacation, she'd pack her bags and leave. It was like clockwork. My friends started noticing too. "Dude, she's like a player herself," one of them joked. "Disappears for the off-season and comes back just in time for kickoff." I laughed it off, but deep down, I was starting to feel uneasy. I tried to rationalize it, maybe she just needed a break from the city, or maybe I was being paranoid. After all, she always came back before the season started, cheerful as ever, showering me with affection like nothing had happened. But then there was that one winter. She left for 2 weeks, claiming she was going to help her cousin after his surgery. The night before she left, she was unusually quiet, almost distant. "Are you okay?" I asked, watching her pack. "Yeah," she said with a forced smile. "Just stressed about the trip, that's all." I wanted to push her, to ask why she always seemed so secretive about these trips, but I didn't. Instead, I kissed her goodbye the next morning, telling myself it was nothing. But the unease didn't go away. For 2 weeks, she barely texted. When I asked how things were going, her replies were vague and short: "Busy, but fine," or "Exhausted, talk later." When she finally came back, she was her usual cheerful self, acting like everything was perfectly normal. She even brought me a souvenir, a keychain shaped like a football. "See? Even when I'm away, I think about us," she said with a wink. I smiled, pretending everything was fine, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The excuses, the timing, the distance, it all felt too convenient. But every time I tried to confront her about it, she'd shut me down with that infectious smile and a hug that made all my doubts seem ridiculous. For years, I let it slide, convincing myself that her absences were just a quirk of her personality. After all, no relationship is perfect, right? The next few months were a whirlwind, and not in a good way. It felt like our relationship had turned into one of those carnival rides, up one minute, down the next, and always leaving me dizzy and questioning why I got on in the first place. When she came back from her latest family emergency, I thought things would go back to normal. At first, they did. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. She was her usual cheerful self, full of stories about her trip. She even suggested we plan a getaway of our own during the next off-season, a trip just for the two of us. I know I've been away a lot, she said, wrapping her arms around me. But I want to make it up to you. You're my everything. It sounded perfect, and for a while, I believed her. We went back to our old routines, watching games, cheering for the team, and spending lazy weekends in front of the TV. She'd even started planning little surprises, like cooking my favorite meals or leaving sweet notes in my jacket pocket. But then, just as suddenly, the mood would shift. Out of nowhere, she'd snap at me for the smallest things, like forgetting to take out the trash or asking too many questions about her day. Other times, she'd retreat completely, sitting on the couch with this faraway look in her eyes. "Is everything okay?" I'd ask, trying to gauge what was going on. "Yeah, just tired," she'd say, forcing a smile. The thing is, I didn't buy it. She wasn't just tired, something was off. But every time I tried to press her, she'd either change the subject or accuse me of being too clingy. "Why can't you just trust me?" she snapped one night after I asked about her distant behavior. It stung. I didn't want to be the guy who doubted his girlfriend, but the constant mood swings were starting to take a toll. And then there were the little things, tiny cracks that I couldn't ignore. She'd get defensive if I asked who she was texting. She started working late more often, even on days when she didn't have much going on. And her phone? She guarded it like it held state secrets. One night, while we were watching a replay of an old match, her phone buzzed, and she jumped to grab it before I could even glance at the screen. "Work stuff," she said quickly, tucking it into her pocket. "Since when does your job text you at 9 p.m.? I asked, half joking but genuinely curious. "It's nothing," she said, brushing it off. "You're overthinking again." I tried to let it go, but the doubt was like a splinter under my skin, small but impossible to ignore. The next day, she swung back to being the doting girlfriend, texting me sweet messages all day and surprising me with tickets to the team's next home game. "I'm sorry if I've been distant," she said, her voice full of sincerity. "I've just been stressed. But I promise, you're my number one." And just like that, I was pulled back in. For the next few weeks, things were good, better than they had been in months. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all too good to be true. The last home match of the season was supposed to be a celebration. Our team was on fire, and if they won, it would secure them the championship. Everyone in the city was buzzing with excitement, and of course, we had our tickets ready weeks in advance. I'd been looking forward to it for months. There's nothing like the energy of a stadium on a night like that, tens of thousands of fans chanting in unison, the air practically crackling with anticipation. And this time, it wasn't just any game. It was the game. But, because life has a cruel sense of humor, I woke up the morning of the match feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train. Fever, chills, and a sore throat that made swallowing feel like gargling razor blades. "You don't look good," she said, her brow furrowed as she handed me a glass of water. "I'll be fine," I croaked, already reaching for my jersey. She laughed and shook her head. "You can't go like this. You'll end up passed out in the stands, and I'll have to carry you home." I tried to argue, but she wasn't having it. "Stay home, rest," she said, brushing a hand across my forehead. "You're burning up." I hated the idea of missing the match, but she was right. There was no way I could make it through the night in my condition. "I guess I'll just watch it on TV," I muttered, sinking back into the couch. She kissed my forehead, her voice full of sympathy. "Don't worry, I'll cheer loud enough for both of us. We can celebrate together when I get back." Even though I felt miserable, I smiled at her. She'd always been the louder fan between us, and I knew she'd represent us well. "All right," I said. "But don't lose your voice out there." She grinned, already grabbing her scarf and jacket. "Don't wait up for me," she said, heading toward the door. "It's going to be a long night." I watched her leave, her excitement almost palpable, and felt a pang of jealousy. I wanted to be there, in the thick of it, chanting and celebrating with her. But instead, I was stuck at home, a blanket over my shoulders and a box of tissues by my side. The sound of the door clicking shut felt oddly final, but I chalked it up to being sick. Besides, what could possibly go wrong at a football match? Lying on the couch with the TV remote in one hand and a mug of tea in the other, I tuned in to watch the match. The fever had me feeling weak and disoriented, but I wasn't about to miss this game, even if it was from the living room. The atmosphere at the stadium came alive through the screen, thousands of fans chanting, waving flags, and creating a sea of team colors. It was electric. I could almost feel the energy radiating through the TV, and for a moment, I wished I'd powered through my sickness just to be there. The match was intense. Our team was putting up a stellar performance, and the captain, as always, was leading the charge. Every pass, every tackle, every shot on goal had me gripping the edge of the couch. When we finally scored the winning goal, the stadium erupted in chaos, the good kind. Fans were screaming, jumping, hugging each other. The commentators couldn't even be heard over the roar of the crowd. And then, as the final whistle blew, the real chaos began. The cameras panned to the stands, where fans were climbing over barriers, spilling onto the field in celebration. It was like the floodgates had opened. Within minutes, the pitch was packed with people. Some were chanting the team's name, others were snapping selfies, and a few even managed to drape themselves in the team's flag. It was the kind of unbridled joy that makes football so special. For a moment, I forgot about my fever and found myself smiling, even laughing. It felt like our entire city was celebrating together, united by this one incredible win. The broadcast stayed with the celebrations for a while, cutting between shots of the ecstatic crowd and the players hugging each other. The captain, of course, was at the center of it all. Fans swarmed him, shouting his name and trying to snap pictures. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. He handled it like the pro he was, smiling and high-fiving everyone around him. Wish I could have been there, I thought to myself, imagining the stories my girlfriend would tell when she got home. As the crowd on the field started to thin out, the cameras switched to a sideline room, a quieter spot where the players had gathered to celebrate away from the fans. The scene was a bit calmer, but the energy was still there. That's when something caught my eye. At first, it was just a flash of movement in the corner of the screen, a man and a woman locked in what looked like a passionate kiss. My fevered brain didn't register it at first. Just another happy couple caught up in the celebration, right? But then the man turned his head, and my heart dropped. It was the captain. And the woman? It was her. My girlfriend. I froze, staring at the screen as if my fever-addled mind had conjured the whole thing. But no matter how much I blinked, the image didn't go away. There she was, in the sideline room, wrapped in the captain's arms, kissing him like they were the only two people in the world. It didn't make sense. My brain scrambled for an explanation, any explanation that would make this less horrifying. Was it a mistake? A trick of the camera? Maybe it was just someone who looked like her. But no. I knew her face, her smile, her hair, even the scarf she was wearing. It was unmistakable. The commentators, oblivious to the storm brewing in my chest, continued their cheerful chatter about the team's victory and the captain's contributions. They even made an offhand comment about his passionate celebration, before the camera quickly cut away to another shot of the crowd. My heart was pounding. My chest felt tight. I was no longer sick with the flu, I was sick with betrayal. For the rest of the broadcast, I couldn't focus on the game highlights or the post-match interviews. My mind was stuck on that one moment, replaying it over and over like a broken record. When the match coverage ended, I just sat there, the room silent except for the sound of my shallow breathing. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to call her right away, demand an explanation, but another part of me, the part that didn't want to hear whatever excuse she'd give, stopped me. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling heavier than the last. Finally, I heard the familiar sound of her keys jangling in the lock. She was home. I stayed seated on the couch as she walked in, her face glowing with excitement. "What a game," she exclaimed, dropping her bag by the door. "You should have been there, babe." The atmosphere was incredible. I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, my stomach churning. She noticed my silence and frowned. "What's wrong? Are you feeling worse?" I grabbed the remote and rewound the broadcast to the moment that had shattered everything. "Watch this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, her smile faltering, but she came over to the couch and looked at the screen. The footage played, the sideline room, the kiss, the captain, her. Her face went pale. "Care to explain?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. Her eyes filled with tears as she stared at the screen, her hands trembling. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, in a choked voice, she whispered, "I can explain." "Explain?" I repeated, my voice sharper now. "You're on national television, kissing him. What could you possibly say to explain this?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her eyes darted to the TV, then back to me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Find out what?" I shot back. "That you've been sneaking around with the team captain? That you've been lying to me for, what? How long has this been going on?" She looked down, unable to meet my gaze. It's complicated," she said, her hands trembling. "Complicated?" I laughed bitterly. "You were kissing him on live TV. There's nothing complicated about that." She broke down, sobbing into her hands. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said between gasps. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." "Then what was it supposed to be like?" I demanded, standing up now, the anger boiling over. "Was I just a placeholder while you waited for him? Or were you hoping to keep stringing me along until it got too messy to hide?" She shook her head furiously. "No. It's not like that. I love you, I do." "But," she stopped herself, her breath hitching. "But what?" I shouted. "Just say it." She crumpled onto the couch, her voice barely audible. "We've been seeing each other, for 5 years. The air left my lungs. 5 years. Longer than I'd even known her. Longer than we'd been together." I staggered back, gripping the edge of the table for support. 5 years? I whispered, more to myself than to her. She nodded, her face red and swollen from crying. "It started before we met. I didn't think it would last. I didn't know what to do." "You didn't know what to do?" I said, my voice trembling with disbelief. "You could have broken up with me. You could have told me the truth. Instead, you let me build a life with you while you were sneaking off to be with him?" She tried to reach for me, but I stepped back, the betrayal too raw. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I wanted to end it so many times, but I didn't know how. And then we got so close, and I." "And you what?" I cut her off. "You kept lying. You kept using me as your backup plan while you played house with him." Her silence was answer enough. I couldn't look at her anymore. The woman I thought I knew, the person I'd built my life around, wasn't who I thought she was. She was a stranger who had ripped my heart out and stomped on it. "You have an hour to pack your things," I said, my voice cold and empty. Her head snapped up, her tear-filled eyes wide with panic. "Please, don't do this. We can fix this. I'll end it with him, I promise." "No," I said firmly. "You ended this the moment you kissed him. You ended this the moment you started lying to me. Now pack your things and get out." She begged, pleaded, but I was done. I couldn't even hear her anymore over the pounding in my ears. Betrayal, anger, heartbreak, it all blurred into one overwhelming noise. As she went upstairs to pack, I sat back down on the couch, staring blankly at the screen. The image of her and the captain was still there, frozen in time, a brutal reminder of everything I'd just lost. She left within the hour, her bags hastily packed, her face streaked with tears. She kept begging for another chance, but I was beyond hearing it. The second the door clicked shut behind her, I collapsed onto the couch, the weight of what had just happened finally hitting me. The silence was deafening, but my mind wasn't. It was racing, replaying everything over and over, the kiss, her confession, the years of lies. The anger was like a fire in my chest, growing hotter with every passing second. She hadn't just betrayed me, she'd humiliated me. And so had he. The captain. The face of the team. The guy everyone looked up to. I thought about how many times I'd cheered for him, how much respect I'd had for him. And all the while, he was sneaking around with my girlfriend. No. I wasn't going to let this slide. That's when the idea hit me. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. It was petty, sure. But after what they'd done, I didn't care about being the bigger person. They'd made fools of me, and now it was my turn to hit back. I spent the rest of the night planning, going through old recordings of the match to find the perfect moment. It didn't take long, there it was, clear as day, the two of them in the sideline room, kissing like they didn't have a care in the world. By the next morning, I'd turned that screenshot into a poster. I added a bold caption, "Get out of the MVP team of the Suburban Championship." I knew what I was going to do. The team had their final away match of the season coming up, and I was going to be there, front and center, holding that poster high for everyone to see. I thought about the consequences, about what might happen if the fans saw it, if the media picked it up. But honestly, I didn't care. If he wanted to play the role of the hero while destroying other people's lives, then it was time for the world to see who he really was. The day of the match came, and I felt a strange mix of nerves and adrenaline as I walked into the stadium, the poster rolled up under my arm. The atmosphere was electric, just like every game, but this time, I wasn't there to cheer. I waited until the second half, when the cameras always started scanning the crowd for reactions. As soon as the time felt right, I unrolled the poster and held it high above my head. It didn't take long for people to notice. Fans around me pointed, some laughed, others pulled out their phones to snap pictures. And then, just as I'd hoped, the camera found me. The image of the captain and my now ex-girlfriend, along with my message, was broadcast live to the entire stadium, and to everyone watching at home. I saw heads turning, murmurs spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Phones lit up as people started sharing the moment online. By the time the match ended, it wasn't just a scandal, it was a full-blown sensation. I left the stadium with a strange sense of satisfaction. I didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain, neither of them would walk away from this unscathed. The poster spread like wildfire. By the time I got home from the match, my phone was buzzing non-stop with messages and notifications. Social media was ablaze. Fans of the team were furious, not just because their captain had cheated on his wife, but because he'd tarnished the image of the club they all loved. I watched the chaos unfold online with a strange mix of satisfaction and disbelief. Clips of the match broadcast, including my poster, were being shared on every platform imaginable. The caption I'd written was now a meme, plastered over photos of the captain in his uniform. By the next morning, it was official. The team released a statement saying they were terminating the captain's contract effective immediately. The statement didn't mention why, but everyone already knew. The truth had spread too far and too fast to contain. I learned through mutual acquaintances that his wife had seen the footage too. She left him the same day, taking the kids and filing for divorce. The rumor was that she'd already lawyered up and was gunning for everything: house, savings, the works. As for my ex, she texted me a few days later. It was a long, rambling message full of apologies and excuses, claiming she never meant to hurt me and begging for a second chance. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. She tried reaching out to my friends and even my family, but no one was interested in hearing her side of the story. She'd burned every bridge she had with me, and she knew it. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into moving on. I went back to therapy, hit the gym, and reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from during my relationship. Slowly but surely, the pain started to fade. But there's one thing I'll never forget: the look on her face when she saw that footage, the moment she realized her lies had finally caught up with her. And the captain? He'll always be a reminder that even the people we admire most can have secrets lurking beneath the surface. The fallout was messy, but in the end, I felt free. Free of the lies, free of the doubt, and free of a relationship that was never as perfect as I thought it was. Sometimes, the truth hurts. But it's better than living a lie. In the months that followed, my life began to take a new shape. It wasn't easy at first. The betrayal had left a scar, and trust felt like a distant concept. But there's something about hitting rock bottom that forces you to rebuild, stronger and more resilient than before. I threw myself into things I'd neglected during my relationship. I joined a local amateur football team, something I'd always wanted to do but had put off for years. Playing the game I loved, rather than just watching it, gave me a sense of purpose. The guys on the team became a new kind of family, their camaraderie and support reminding me that life could still be good. Work became another focus. I poured my energy into advancing my career, picking up extra projects and networking like never before. Within 6 months, I landed a promotion, moving into a role I'd been eyeing for years. For the first time in a long time, I felt proud of myself, not just for what I'd accomplished, but for how far I'd come emotionally. As for my ex, her life didn't fare so well. Word spread quickly about her involvement with the captain, and let's just say that kind of reputation sticks. She tried to keep a low profile, but the damage was done. Mutual friends cut ties with her, and even her family seemed distant from her. I heard through the grapevine that she tried to reach out to the captain after his contract was terminated, hoping they could salvage whatever twisted relationship they'd built. But it turns out, her knight in shining armor wasn't so noble after all. Without his team's salary and public image, the captain had little to offer, and he moved on without a second thought. She tried dating again, but according to friends who still keep tabs, it never went well. I wasn't surprised. After all, it's hard to build something real when your foundation is built on lies and betrayal. As for me, I took my time. I wasn't in any rush to jump into another relationship, but I wasn't bitter either. I wanted to heal, to figure out who I was outside of being her boyfriend. And it worked. A year later, I met someone. She wasn't a football fan at first, but when she found out how much the sport meant to me, she made an effort to learn about it. She didn't just go along with it, she genuinely got into it, asking questions, cheering alongside me at matches, and even joining in on some of the amateur games I played. What struck me most was how honest she was. From day one, there were no secrets, no weird mood swings, no sudden disappearances. Just two people getting to know each other, building something real. One day, after we'd been together for about a year, we were watching a match at home. She turned to me and said, "I love how passionate you are about this. It's infectious." That was the moment I realized I'd found someone who truly saw me, not just the football-loving guy, but everything else too. Looking back, I don't regret what happened with my ex. It hurt, sure, but it taught me valuable lessons about boundaries, self-worth, and the kind of relationship I truly wanted. She's still a reminder of a painful chapter in my life, but that's all she is, a chapter. The story has moved on, and so have I. These days, I feel like I've finally reclaimed my life. Football is still my passion, but it's not my escape anymore. It's something I share with people who love me, people I trust, and people who have proven they're here for the long haul. As for her? Last I heard, she's still trying to figure things out, stuck in the wreckage of the choices she made. And while I wish her no ill will, I can't help but feel grateful that I'm no longer part of that mess. Life moves on. And so have I. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference.